Welcome everybody. We're going to do a steeking video today, and I've got a project here that I'm going to be working on to show you how to cut your knitting with scissors. I know that sounds like a crazy thing to do, but it's actually a very slick technique. Down here on the table we've got a project called Eliza 2. It's a shawl, and this shawl has been knit completely in the round. So it's just one big flat circle in a way. There you go. And to make it into a shawl and to put it on someone's head, obviously around someone's shoulders, we need to cut this open. The reason why it's been knit in the round is because the yarn that's been used, which is County Effect yarn, is a yarn that has long striping repeats. And in order to get the striping repeats to match up nicely in the front, think about doing a cardigan, it's really nice to be able to knit it as a tube and then not have to think about what colors you used on the right side versus the left side. So steeking is a great way to use knitting in the round technique, and then just cut your garment and put on your trim, and you're good to go. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is stabilize the steek line. This is called the steek line because it's where it's a planned line where you cut it with your scissors. But when you cut it, there's going to be a little bit of fraying action on either side of the cut line, so we want to stabilize that. You can do it with a sewing machine. You can sew a line up here, or you can do it old school by crocheting a chain up the side of the steek line. Alright, so what we're doing is essentially doing a crochet chain. I just want to show you what that looks like first. So normally if we were crocheting, we'd start with a slip knot, and in this case I'm just going to pull a loop up through the surface of the work. And then what happens, because it's hard to see when we're doing it right on the garment, is that the crochet hook dips through the fabric, grabs the yarn on the underside of the fabric, brings it up to the surface and through the loop that's on your chain. So it's hard to imagine there's some imaginary fabric between my crochet hook and the yarn. And so my crochet hook is going through the fabric to the underside. It's grabbing the yarn on the underside, pulling it up through the fabric and through the loop on the surface of the fabric. And that's a crochet chain. Now let me show you that in an actual piece of fabric where there's some good contrast. So here's a little sample that we have here in the store. And what I do to create this stabilizing crochet chain is I insert my hook into close to the bottom of the work, draw a loop up. This replaces the slip knot that I started with in the last demo. And then here we go. My crochet hook goes through the fabric, and on the underside it's rolling around the yarn and pulling it up to the front of the fabric and then through the loop that's on the surface. I'm fighting with a little bit, so let me do that again. My crochet hook goes underneath, grabs the yarn, pulls it through to the top of the work and through the loop that's on my hook. I'll do that again. Pierce through the fabric, roll your hook around the yarn, pull it up to the surface of the fabric and through the loop that's on your hook. If the loop that's on your hook is tight, you'll have a hard time pulling it through. So I'm going to make that loop just a little bit bigger, stick it through again, roll it around, bring it up, and now it comes through easily. And then I can just pull on my hook a little bit to tighten the chain, the previous chain. That's essentially what we're doing, but on the project here it's a little bit harder to see. So I just wanted to slow that down for you and give you a shot of what that looks like on both sides of the fabric. So if you look closely here, you can see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches in a row here. They're alternating in color, but there are 5 stitches here, and we'll cut up right in the middle of that line. So I'm going to do a stabilizing crochet chain right in between the 4th and the 5th stitch, and in between the 1st and the 2nd stitch. And I do it like this. I'm using some yarn from the project because it's handy and I can, and I'm going to stick my crochet hook in between, in this case, the first and the second stitch. Here's where my eye is going to. This blue stitch is the first stitch, the brown is the second, and so I'm going to just stick my crochet hook in between those two stitches. I'm going to grab my yarn from below the work and pull it through so I have a little loop. Now I'm going to leave a good long tail on this side, and I'll secure it to this loop after I'm done. The loop doesn't have to be right at the edge, just above the edge is fine. And now I'm going to crochet. What that means is I'm just going to stick my crochet hook in to the stitch on the row above. So there's where my yarn is coming out. I'm going to go into the row above, stick my hook into the underside of the work, wrap the yarn around it, and bring it up to the surface and through the loop that was on my hook. I'm going to do that again. So I'm just going to go up a row in between the first and second stitch, put my crochet hook underneath, wrap the yarn around it, and bring it through to the surface and through the stitch on my hook. This is a simple crochet chain. And now I'll just do a few of those so you can see it in faster action. I'm finding my yarn on the other side. If you can flip it back, but after a while you get used to it and you don't have to keep flipping the fabric all the time. Of course, now it won't work for me, will it? There we go. I keep eyeballing it to make sure I'm in between the first and second stitches. I'll just show you what's going on underneath. So I stick my hook through. My hook is going around the yarn, and then it's pulling it back up through that stitch. Let me do that again. So into the hole, around the yarn, and back up through the stitch on the surface. Sometimes with stranded color work, it's a little tricky because you've got more than one strand of yarn running across the back of your work. If we take a look at the back of the work, you can see that there's a line. The bottom side of my crochet chain is just running along the back of the work, and on the front you can see the crochet chain just very barely right there running through the stitches. And again, that's there just to stabilize everything so that when I cut it, nothing frays. Right, I'll keep doing that for a while, and then I'll give you a glimpse of what it looks like when I'm closer to the top. So I need to crochet all the way up to the top of my garment, and then I'll put another line of crochet stitches over here, and then we're going to cut with scissors right in between. So I've done one crochet chain line up one side of the Steek line here in our garment, and you can see that line's running all the way up to the top here. And let me just show you how I finished that off. So take that out here. So I crocheted up to the last, I had this my right at the edge there, there's my last loop, and then I took the yarn and I pulled it through the last loop, and I broke it or cut it, and I just pulled it straight through like that. Later on I'll just weave in that tail, and it's all nice and secure. So now I'm going to do the second line of crochet chain, and so I'm going to get started again. Now I can check, and it looks like I might have veered off a little bit. I'm working quite, right on the edge. So I'm just going to pull back a few stitches. There we go. And I'm going to move myself over just a little bit. So I'll make that loop a little bigger. Okay. All right, I like that better. I can see a stitch on the other side here, so that's all good. I'm going to carry on, and I'm just going to let you know that while we were in between takes here, Suzanne asked me a good question, and that was about the yarn that I'm using to create the Steek line. I'm using the wool from the project, and I said earlier because it was convenient, but also I'm using it because it's wool. And the reason why I like wool is because it's sticky, so it keeps everything in place after you cut. And I also like it because it's stretchy, so it doesn't create a tight line in here. You can see that I've still got some flexibility here in those stitches. All right, so here we are with Eliza 2, and I've completed my Steek lines. They're crocheted, the crocheted binding is here, and so now it's time to do the cutting. All you need are a pair of nice sharp scissors and a little bit of internal fortitude. The first thing I'm going to do is pull one layer forward because I don't want to cut 2 layers of fabric, just one. So here we are. I'm going to start down at the bottom, and I'm just going to cut carefully in between the 2 crocheted lines that I did previously. Here we go. Again, just make sure there isn't anything underneath that you might accidentally snip. Continue to cut in a straight line until you get to whatever opening you've made for your Steek. There we go. And that's the cutting part. It's now open. All right, so now the instructions have us picking up stitches to create binding that's going to go over the steeked edge. And you can see the edge stitches here. There are 3 of them, and the instructions are to go in between stitches 2 and 3 to pick up the for the binding. So here's stitch 1, there's stitch 2, and there's stitch 3. So I'm going to go in between here, and I'm going to start back down here. Actually, I'm going to start right here, and so I insert my needle from the front to the back, working from the right to the left. I take my yarn and I just loop it over the back of the needle and pull that needle up through that hole that is the stitch. And then I stick my needle into the next one, and this is just like knitting. Make sure you don't use the tail. Wrap the yarn around behind and pull it up, and do it again. Knit, pull it up, knit, pull it up. In this pattern, it says to pick up 1 stitch in every stitch. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll show you what that looks like when I'm done. Okay. All right, so I've finished picking up all the stitches along the edge of my steeked shawl, and I've knit about 5 rows along this edge. The idea here is to knit as many rows as it takes to cover the steeked part of the fabric. So each time I knit a row, I kind of pull back that cut line and compare it to see if I'm covering it. And I think I've got to that point now. So what happens next is that I'm going to knit on the wrong side to create a purl line here, and then continue to knit the same number of rows on the other side, completely encasing the cut edge of the fabric, and that just makes it look nice and neat. So that's where I am at this point. I've picked up the stitches, I've knit and purled, done 5 rows of stocking stitch. I think that's tall enough now to cover over my steeked cut edge. I'm going to do 1 row of purling on the right side or knitting on the wrong side to create a turning ridge, and then I'll knit down and bind the edge of this binding to the inside of my shawl.